Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the end of many eras. I don't know. Well, this is the time when we end off a particular quote-unquote era of Arthur, and we do so by looking back at the season that was. It's time for the Elwood City Limits Season 7 recap. My name's Will Young, and I am one half of the hosts of Elwood City Limits. If you've never listened to one of these recap episodes before, Lucas Mancini, my co-host, we individually take a look back at the season in general review, and then we also give our top 5 episodes. We do our top 5. We don't do a bottom 5 episodes because, A, there's not that many episodes, so they can't all be good or all be bad. Some of them kind of fall in the middle, so we decided to focus more on the positive. And yeah, that's what we really want to bring here. Every once in a while when we have an episode where it's, we don't really make it, we're not effusively positive. Some people are like, oh, you don't have to be negative. And it's not about being negative. I don't feel like it's worth doing a review podcast of anything if you're not being honest. And I mean, we also do admit that we can only be so hard on a children's show, so we try not to take it too seriously along the way. So we're going to be hearing from Lucas in a little bit. He's going to give us his thoughts on Season 7 as well. I think I will start off, though, with just kind of a general review of what we talked about this season. And at the end, make sure you stay to the end because I'm going to let you know what's going to be coming up for Elwood City Limits in the coming weeks. There's some fun stuff as we are getting ready to celebrate 3 years on the air. Now that's hard to believe. So Season 7, it feels like it both feels like we should be farther along in Arthur. Whoops, missed some weeks in there. But also, that also feels like we've come quite a ways. Season 7, I don't want to be a broken record at this point, but I really, really appreciate that we're comfortable enough in the show. We're like comfortable enough in our own clothes now that we can kind of do a McBain, let's get silly with some of these episode concepts. I mean, even for the episodes that we didn't like or that we just thought were okay, you can't accuse them of not being creative. That's what I always like about Arthur, is that it can take a stock episode description, let's say, and it can make it interesting because it's in the world of Arthur. I think that right now, Lucas and I, and if you've been listening along with us, you as well, are invested enough in the show that you could pretty much go on any journey they want you to, and just based on the characters and the setting, you'll be entertained one way or the other. I also really appreciate that we're opening up the Arthur roster a little bit. I've been waiting for episodes focusing on George, for example, and I'm really glad to be getting those now. I hope the roster will continue to open. We got an episode with Jenna. I'm hoping personally for more episodes with Fern, because I love Fern. And I hope we also continue to be surprised with where the episodes go as well. It's not just necessarily the main core group anymore, but I'm also pleased that I'm not really getting tired of those either. And you'll see that reflected in my top 5 coming up a bit later in the episode. I must admit, very pleased at how they are taking characters that Lucas and I have admittedly not liked for a lot of their time, and if they can't make us like them, then at least they are doing something to make us like an episode of theirs that's focused on them. I'm thinking specifically of Prunella and Muffy, 2 very hard sells for us in the beginning because I think that they were just kind of meant to be plugged in to play a role. Now I feel like at least if we don't like Muffy, we understand her character and can know when she's kind of acting appropriately and acting inappropriately. That doesn't mean that we are always happy to see her, but it can lead to surprises. Prunella, I think, has pretty much all been saved by, especially by Marina. Talk about characters who came out of nowhere practically and have done her a great service. I've really enjoyed their chemistry together. I love Henry Screever too as a device. So yeah, they still got tricks up their sleeve, and it's still a lot of fun to watch. The voice cast additions have been generally quite good. I'm still a little bit shaky on DW's voice at this point, but it's it's totally fine. I don't hate it or anything. It's just I guess I prefer the classic DW voice at this point, but I think Arthur's new voice has acquitted himself very well. Any other general season thoughts? No, like I say, I'm just happy we're getting creative. We're getting more off the wall. We're getting some really odd references in there, and yeah, it's been a great time. As always, I really continue to genuinely enjoy watching this children's show. We're also experimenting with form a bit more with 2-part episodes, which I find are a lot of fun to talk about. And so far, they've justified their length, and I'm looking forward. Hopefully, they continue to do this in the future. Okay, so that's my general kind of season thoughts. I'm going to save my top 5 for after the jump here. We're going to turn it over to Lucas Mancini, and he's going to give us his full rundown. After we come back from Lucas, I've got a couple of emails I want to shout out since we're going to be a little bit off the grid in terms of emails for a little bit. And at the very end of the episode, I'm going to let you in on the special schedule that has to do with our 3-year anniversary. I think you're really going to like this one. So Lucas is coming up, and then stick around for my picks. See you soon.
Yo, what's up? It's Lucas from Elwood City Limits. It has come to that time again when it's the end of a season, and me and Will give our thoughts. And what a season it was. Season 7, probably my favorite post-season 3 season of Arthur. Like, for sure. I remember me and Will kind of lamenting how iffy the quality on season 6 was. And season 7, whether the episodes were good or bad, there was always really something to talk about. One of the most interesting seasons I think we've had thus far. It was a little bit tougher remembering some of the episodes from this one because we've been so on again, off again recording this summer, what with vacations and life stuff getting in the way. But I did some research and went back and kind of looked at some of the older episodes, and I think I've got a pretty solid list. Before we get into it, of course, if you want to support the podcast, the best way is to rate us on iTunes. I feel like we haven't reminded you guys to do that in a while, but it is a major help. But even more importantly is to go to bestofhalifax.com and to vote for Elwood City Limits for Best Podcast. That's in the news and media section. We get to go to a big fancy party. It's really fun. All right, without further ado, this is my top 5 episodes of this season. With number 5, it is a throwback to the early Arthur days of yore, a throwback to the episodes that kind of got me and Will started on this journey of recording this podcast. And that is Return of the Snowball. Finally, we get to somewhat close the book on the saga of DW's missing Snowball. I liked this episode a lot more than Will did. He was kind of sick of all the Snowball talk. But for me, I have been loving the continuity in Arthur upon rewatching it, because when I originally watched it as a kid, it was in syndication, so we weren't watching it in order, so we didn't really get to see the continuity at play and watch as sort of, even though the Arthur characters all stay the same age and you know, time never really moves forward, you still get to see certain things prop up and be like, oh, I can't believe they remembered this from this much earlier season. So the Snowball, one of the most infamous Arthur episodes ever, the original Snowball episode, and of course it's got that great twist where it was aliens who stole the Snowball. And though they do kind of go back to the well with this one in terms of the alien usage, and that was kind of Will's issue with it, and that is kind of the weakest part of the episode, I just loved the the going back and trying to figure out what was up with the snowball. And I think there's some real good, genuine moments in this episode in terms of Arthur trying to make DW happy, even though he's annoyed by her. DW sort of tricking Brain is like really, really funny. I don't know. Something about this episode when I was looking at the episodes from season 7, it stood out. Not as much to be higher than some of these other episodes, but enough to get its mention here. Number 4, The World of Tomorrow. No, not Sky Captain. This one's about Binky sort of struggling with having to repeat the 3rd grade, but also just lots of hijinks in the museum and lots of cutaways to the future, stuff like that. It wouldn't be a top 5 list for the season if there wasn't a Binky episode, and this is the Binky episode from the season. So I remember having a fun time watching it, and hence its spot on number 4. Number 3 is a character that doesn't usually get an episode in the top 5, and that's Don't Ask Muffy, which stars Muffy, and one of the tough customers. She doesn't show up so often that I have to actually look up her name. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. Let me see this. Tough customers, Arthur. I know you're all yelling at your screens right now. I know you're all freaking out about how I can't remember this, and I'm supposed to be the Arthur expert. Okay, we got Rattles. Molly. Oh my God, how could I forget Molly? We get a pairing of Molly and Francine. Not Francine. Oh my goodness, I'm really scatterbrained now. We get a pair of Molly and Muffy, 2 M names in this episode, and it's a great dynamic because Molly's older and wiser, but she's also a little bit more rough around the edges. So she imparts advice on Muffy, and Muffy is, of course, rich from a different side of the tracks than Molly, but she's a lot more younger, and so this whole bit about Muffy having an advice column, I don't know, it's a very unique episode, and it's one of the more, I feel like season 7 has made Muffy a lot more endearing than she has used to have been in the past, and it shows that hopefully her character only gets better. I'm not sure if she'll ever reach, Banky status or anything, but Muffy had X-Pac heat for like the first 6 seasons of this show, and they really weren't doing anything with her. So it's nice to see Muffy get a little bit more time in the spotlight and used a little bit more effectively. And Molly is just such a great character. I wish there was more episodes with the older characters. Number 2 is Elwood City Turns 100. This was one of 2 big 2-parter specials this season, the other one being April 9th, and though April 9th just was outside of my list, Elwood City Turns 100 has to be up here. It's got everything we want from an Arthur episode. It just feels more important being the 100th episode. There's an air of gravitas to it that's not present in every Arthur episode, especially with its length, and it's an ensemble episode done right. Everybody's got a moment. The funny parts are funny. The sincere parts are sincere and heartwarming. The songs are good. Elwood City Turns 100 is a landmark Arthur episode. And it was a landmark episode of this podcast, too, because it also marked the 100th episode of Elwood City Limits. So I could think of few episodes better to watch outside the context of this season than Elwood City Limits Turns 100. It had to be on this list, and I think it's executed so effectively that it deserves its number 2 spot. But what was better than it? Well, this one might come out of left field, but it was Waiting to Go, another Binky episode, but also Binky and the Brain. This episode, me and Will talked about this before. This is a trope that's happened in a bunch of different things, whether it's, the movie Enemy Mine or the one with the American soldier and the Japanese soldier where they're stranded on the island and they have to work together. 2 foes sort of at odds, put in an extreme situation, and they have to learn to work together to overcome their circumstances. In this case, Binky and Brain are left at soccer practice, and it seems it's actually only like 10 minutes that they're waiting for their parents, but they start to lose their grip on reality. And, I almost don't want to spoil it, but it's an episode that I think is hilarious in its conceit. I think that it's executed really well, and I think it goes some wild places, and it's just really funny. And Brain, I think, is a character where he's best utilized when he sort of has someone to play off of, right? Like the Brain and Fern episodes are really cool. I think Brain and Muffy is a fun combo. Brain and Francine is a fun combo. Even Brain and Buster. So Brain is used really effectively here, playing off of Binky, and of course it's Binky. What else do you need? I mean, Binky's fantastic. So yeah, that is my top 5 list for the season. I'm excited to hear what you guys liked the most in the emails, elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. And I'm excited to hear what Will liked the most. A great season. And a great season of Elwood City Limits as well, including all the guests we've had, talking about, Rapern's wedding. That was a pretty landmark thing for our show and for Arthur in general. Mr. Rapern and the Special Someone. Talking to Rich Morris, who worked on Arthur. Just a great another season of Elwood City Limits. And again, thank you for getting us nominated for the Best of Halifax Awards. I truly wasn't sure if we were going to be nominated again this year, so that means a lot. And it means a lot that everybody listens. I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling at this point. I've been thinking about what my favorite album of the year is. Thus far. If you want to hear about that, it's probably either like Pup, Morbid Stuff, or like I really like that new Chemical Brothers album. That new Denzel Curry album's pretty good. All that stuff's pretty sweet. I really liked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Midsummer. Now I'm just kind of going over topics that you can hear about in the filibusters. If you subscribe to the Patreon, whenever we miss a week, me and Will make sure to get some content out there on the Patreon. So that's yet another way to support us. So that's those are my top 5 for Elwood City Limits, season 7. We'll see you next week or whenever the next episode comes out. I don't know when that'll be. That's up to Will, I suppose. All right, bye-bye.
Hi there, Elwood City Limits listener. Just a quick note here from your buddy, your pal, Will Young, that this show is supported by all of you, listeners just like you, by the following ways. Facebook.com/Elwood City Limits. Twitter @ECL Podcast. Tumblr, ElwoodCityLimits.tumblr.com. And Instagram @Elwood City Limits. Drop us a line on social media. We'd love to hear from you, and give us a like, a heart, whatever it is. Email elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. You can get your email read here on the air. Just send it to us and let us know what you think of the episode, of the show, of anything in particular that we might have talked about or that's on your mind. And you can find the podcast by going to elwoodcitylimits.libsyn.com, and you can find it at your local podcast provider. Now, if the show is not on a service that you use all the time and you'd like to change that, make sure to drop us a line and we will get it on there as soon as possible. All right, let's get back to the episode now, already in progress. Welcome back to Elwood City Limits. This is our Season 7 recap, and thank you very much for joining us here. So Lucas has given his thoughts on Season 7, and before we get into my top 5 of the season, there's a couple of bits of housekeeping I want to do here. First of all, I want to say thanks so much to all of our patrons, both old and new. We really appreciate everything that they've done, and of course want to give them their shout out. And if you'd like your own, all you have to do is become a patron. We've got people like Aaron DeFilippo, Caitlin Harrington, Chandler LaFave Boughton, Christine Wong, Christopher Eiffel, Sierra S., Crescent Fresh, Dan Mike Dawson Silva, Emily K., Frappy, Ian Collis, and Jake Bailey. There's Joe Sue, there's Birthday Boy John Dulong, there's John Griswold, there's Kat and Kaylin Krogall, there's Kevin Noon, there's Leanne S., Light Relentless, Macy Ball, Riley Stevens, Ross Ward, Shayna Bennett, Stella, Teresa, and William. Thank you, one and all. Hey, if you'd like me to add a little bit of flavor to your announcement, whatever that may be, as long as it's appropriate, you can let me know on our Patreon Discord, or you can message us on Patreon. There's also a couple of emails here over at elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. I want to make sure to kind of talk about a couple of these before we keep going here, and I hope you don't mind if we're doing it while Lucas isn't present. First off, totally forgot to acknowledge Joel for the very kind email that Joel sent a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. We received it, and I'm glad that you found the podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Dylan sent us an email about a story about a lady who is, what was it exactly? I'm actually just looking at the link right now here, turning milk bags into mats for people in need. So we've still got milk bags on the brain. So I appreciate you keeping us in mind for that. We also have an email here from a friend of mine, Jeff C., who really appreciated the Dad Drowned episode, which is a reference to Ben Drowned. We weren't trying to be flip about Arthur's dad dying. Jeff says, I thought, wow, I knew Arthur sometimes had special episodes, but this is dark. Thanks, Jeff. It's really, really great that you've been listening to us for a long time. Now, there's a couple of other emails here from Lion Dog ZXA and from Matthew, but I want to keep those in the queue for right now because I think Lucas will find them particularly interesting. But thank you, one and all. That's elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. If you have any extended thoughts on Season 7 that you'd like us to read, since we'll be reading on the show, try and keep them brief if you can. But, of course, lots of listeners like to send us in their top 5 of the season as we wrap this up. So, my top 5 of Season 7. You know, it wasn't that easy. I feel like when we started it, we were not as up on Season 7. I think Lucas kind of came around on it before I did, but it's really almost backloaded with the good episodes, I find. So let's start it off here. Number 5 for me is a tie. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of doing ties on lists, but this was really, I couldn't pick which one I liked better, and I didn't want one of them to go. So number 5 is between Pick a Car, Any Car, and Muffy Goes Metropolitan. I wanted these both to be on the list for way different reasons. First of all, Pick a Car, Any Car, I was very entertained by. I also just think it's really novel that they had the Car Talk guys in there. I loved talking about that on the show, and I think that's just a really interesting curiosity to almost have this proto-podcast on the show. And I appreciated, as I talked about in the episode, are the kind of children's view of nostalgia, which is not something you necessarily think about. Kids being nostalgic for something. So I thought that was a very entertaining episode and very interesting to think about and talk about. Muffy Goes Metropolitan, the first Muffy episode that I think we've both really enjoyed. And it was because we are at the point where the joke can be on Muffy. And I think we're okay with that. Muffy as a character can take a little bit of a ribbing now and then, and she's totally fine for it. I really, really liked her interacting with the clash of her idea of Crown City versus what it actually is. And I thought that they actually represented this type of a big city that has a vibrant cultural life quite well. I know that we have some listeners who live in places like Crown City, so you might have to either challenge me or back me up on that. But and I also appreciated that by the end, like, she wasn't a complete stick in the mud. She can have her mind change. She's not a static character. She just is sometimes, depending on how the episode needs her. Muffy's like a spice. You can't have too much of her, or else you get sick of her. But if you use her in the right way, it's really memorable. So I wanted to shout that out as well, because a good Muffy episode is hard to find. Number 4, it's Waiting to Go. The highest ranking quote-unquote Binky episode on my list this season, I should say. Waiting to Go. It's just a really interesting bottle episode. And I don't know, I really appreciate it when the stakes feel high to the characters, but they're relatively low as far as it actually goes. Brain and Binky play off each other very well. It's kind of a slobs versus snobs type of thing. And I just thought this was very funny and memorable. It's got a bit of an unusual title, so it sticks in your head. And so I think that I had a great time just kind of watching that unfold. Number 3, Buster's Amish Mismatch. I didn't think this would actually place as high as it did. When I was going through it, I thought Waiting to Go would be at number 3. But when I thought about it, I actually really appreciated Buster's Amish Mismatch. First of all, it's how I learned about pretty much everything I know about the Amish, which is very little. But still, I think it's great when this children's cartoon takes the opportunity to educate. And I think that they did a pretty good job of that indeed, at least to get it started. I also think that this is something that is strangely applicable to real life these days, where it is almost like cultural appropriation to a degree. It's taking the culture that isn't yours and then using it in a way that you communicates that you don't fully understand the values that go into it. Now, it's not as loaded as cultural appropriation can be today because it is primarily, quote unquote white culture, so to say. But yeah, I still think it's an interesting way to have that conversation, especially with how the episode ends up with Mrs. McGrady and Buster. And I also just really liked the jokes in this episode. I thought that it was funny. Buster's still a very funny character, and it was just such an odd thing for this character to go through, to have an Amish phase. So yeah, it again very memorable for the right reasons, I'd say, and surprisingly pretty applicable to life today. All right. Number 2. This might be a bit controversial, but number 2 is April 9th. It's not number 1, even though I know that for some people, April 9th will be the top spot. And you may be able to guess what's at number 1, but April 9th, I think, was a big success in a lot of ways. It is one of the most memorable Arthur episodes, and I'd say more memorable than what I have at number 1. It was one of the 2-part episodes, and it's funny how when you watch it, I really thought that it was going to be more obvious that it was a 9/11 parallel. But I really had to dig for that. I had to look up and see, information after the fact that there was a response to 9/11. Because it's more interested. It's not interested in talking about that event specifically. It's more interested in dealing with trauma. And I think this is a very realistic way to portray it, and it doesn't talk down to kids. In fact, it presents it at their level, understanding that sometimes when you see an event that's as scary as this, you can treat it differently, and none of those ways are bad. We all have different ways to process really scary things in our lives, and I think that that's a point that some adult shows have a hard time communicating. So I think it did very well. It was entertaining all the way through. The only reason it's not number 1 is because I feel that when we were talking about it in the episode, there were a couple of things that kind of didn't rub me the right way. I felt like things either wrapped up too fast, or we didn't spend as much time on one character as on another. So I think there could have been a little bit of improvement made, but not much. I think the only way you could have improved this is maybe if you made it like an hour-long special. But that's about it. Like I think that it did very, very well in its role. And number 2 is by no means a bad spot, because I just happen to like number 1 a little bit more, and that would be number 1 of season 7, Elwood City turns 100. It's a bit more of a joyous episode. The stakes aren't quite as high, but it's a really great celebration of Arthur and Elwood City. It almost has, it's masquerading as it's the 100th episode of Arthur, so it's cool that they got to that point in the first place. And then you have this kind of celebration of the city that also doubles as a celebration of the show, because you have all of the characters doing things that are appropriate for them, from Francine to Muffy to Brain to Fern to Arthur and Buster. It seems like everybody has something to do, and it's all very entertaining. You see the guest cameos, and the songs I actually quite enjoyed as well. I'm thinking of the Green-tailed Grebe one right now. Yeah, no, it's just I just think it's really fun, and it's one of the best Arthur episodes for a reason. I think both it and April 9th are 2 of the best Arthur episodes I've ever seen. So it's funny that Elwood City Turns 100 doesn't get the recognition that April 9th does, because I think it's just a little bit better, in my opinion. But Both great episodes, and it's been a really fun season. We have had some not great episodes. We've had some meh episodes, but I'm still really enjoying where we're at with Arthur, and I'm looking to enjoy it more because when we get into season 8, this is the last season where I was watching as a kid. Once we get past season 8, I'm flying completely blind. Like, we could be doing anything at this point, and I have to be like, okay, I gotta trust you. So that's an interesting position to be in. And I'm really looking forward to going through it with you guys. And that's my thoughts on Season 7. Thank you so much for joining us for the journey through it. And I'm really excited to go through Season 8 and to fully cover my entire childhood with Arthur. So what's coming up next for Elwood City Limits? Well, we're not going to have a proper episode for a couple of weeks, which is why I answered emails this time around. Next week, I'm going to count that. I always kind of forget the date. I think it's actually around when this episode comes out this week. But I'm going to count it as next week, as our 3-year anniversary. And it means so much to Lucas and I that we've met so many of you, that we've been a part of your lives in a way. So as a recognition of that, as a way to say thank you to everybody, if you're a patron or if you're not a patron, if you voted for us for Best of Halifax or if you haven't, if you've supported us from the very beginning or just found us, we wanted to do something special for you. We're going to do a full-length commentary. Now, normally, the way that we do this is that we put one up on soundcloud.com/Elwood City Limits, which used to be our old host before we moved to Libsyn. And then the old commentary would go to Patreon, and then the new commentary would go up on there. But then Lucas said to me, the commentaries aren't that much longer than an episode. Why don't we just upload that onto the main feed? And I said, this is why I have you as a co-host. Sometimes he's quite a bit smarter than I am. So to take Lucas's advice, it will be available for free next week, our full-length commentary of the 2006 Arthur CGI movie, Arthur's Missing Pal. It's a doozy, and I would say don't watch this movie without friends or without a commentary track. And we are your friends. So seek out the movie, listen to Lucas and I riff on this movie it's about an hour long. And yeah, I also have a surprise for Lucas there that I'll share with you as well. Patrons first, and then everybody else. But that will be free. I also recommend that in the next week, between this episode and the commentary, that you go to soundcloud.com/Elwood City Limits if you want to listen for free to our full-length commentary of Arthur, It's Only Rock and Roll. You have one more week to do that. As of next Friday, that commentary goes behind the Patreon paywall, which I remind you is only $1 a month or whatever you want to pay. But that will be Patreon exclusive, as well as our commentary on Arthur's Perfect Christmas, which is already behind the Patreon paywall. But you will have Arthur's Missing Pal, the full-length commentary, coming at you next week as a thank you for everything that you've done, because without you, there is no us. We are we are brought to you by listeners just like you, and we continue to be, and we never want to forget that. Then that's going to be next week. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be sitting down with a friend of the show, DJ Bob, and we're going to be talking about the final Arthur album, the final Arthur music album, Arthur's Really Rockin' Music Mix. This is the first time I've ever heard this. I have no idea what to expect. It seems to be all original songs. Bob's pretty excited to talk about it with me, and I'm interested to see what's in store. So that's going to be coming at you near the end of the month, right around my birthday. And then once we get into September, we're going to be hitting the ground running with Season 8. I will remind you that the episodes will be Dear Adil and Bitsy's Breakup if you want to keep watching the show along with us, or if you just like listening to the episodes, that's cool too. Thanks so much, everybody. Really can't wait to enter into Season 8 with you, but we've got some great content coming for you as well. For now, I'll just say, for Lucas Mancini, my name is Will Young. That's Elwood City Limits. That's Arthur Season 7. We will see you in Season 8. And because I didn't say it on the commentary, thank you for 3 years of Elwood City Limits. Love yous.